Two empty shipping crates were still sitting in my front hall when I came home early for my 10th anniversary, carrying an antique music box for my wife. And before I reached the stairs, my cook stopped me and quietly saved me from walking straight into my own ruin. I thought I was about to catch a betrayal. I had no idea I was standing at the mouth of something far worse, something that reached into my marriage, my company, and a child I did not know was mine. My name is Damian Voss. I own the Voss shipping line, the business my father started with one leased vessel and a ledger he protected like scripture. By the time this happened, people liked to call me self-made, which was flattering and false. Men like me are never self-made. We are built by dock workers, schedulers, mechanics, quiet women in back offices, and old promises we barely understand. That afternoon, though, I felt like the luckiest fool alive. I had left the harbor before sunset, still wearing my office suit, with salt wind in my cuffs and a velvet-wrapped music box on the passenger seat beside me. It was a beautiful little thing, brass corners, dark walnut lid, the kind of gift a husband buys when he wants to say, 10 years and I still choose you. I remember rehearsing the words at red lights like an idiot. Celeste, happy anniversary. Celeste, I know I work too much. Celeste, listen to this tune. It reminded me of the night we met. That was the man I was when I put my key in the door. Soft in all the places a rich man should know better than to be soft. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet. No clink from the dining room. No low music from the sitting room. Even the air seemed still, heavy with roasted garlic from the kitchen and something sweeter underneath. Her perfume, maybe, hanging where it should not have been. Then I saw Beatrice. She was standing at the foot of the marble stairs with a dish towel twisted in both hands. Beatrice had worked in my house long enough for me to know the excellence of her soups, and almost nothing else. She was one of those people wealthy families train themselves not to see too clearly. Always present, never centered. She looked up at me that evening in a way she never had before, straight into my face, and I knew at once this was no small household problem. "Sir," she said, barely above a breath, "not yet." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because my mind refused to go where my body had already gone. I shifted the music box under my arm and told her Celeste was expecting me upstairs. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached out and caught my wrist. Her hand was warm from the stove, stronger than I would have believed. "Please," she whispered, "if you go up there now, you'll lose more than your marriage." And then I heard it, my wife laughing. This was lower, private, careless, the kind of laugh a woman gives when she has forgotten the world outside a closed door. A man answered her. His voice was deeper, roughened by sea air and command. I knew that voice. I had heard it over radios, across loading docks, through engine noise and gulls. Adrian Pike, my harbor master. The antique box nearly slid from my hand. My knees touched the edge of the first step so hard I felt the shock climb into my spine. Upstairs, my wife and one of my own men were together in my house, while I stood below them like a stranger. I think I would have gone up anyway. I think I would have shattered whatever I found and myself with it. But Beatrice leaned close enough for me to smell flour and coffee on her apron, and with that whispered warning, she changed the direction of my life. "There's a pantry ledger you need to see first," she said, "because those two aren't only stealing your vows." If this kind of story grips you, subscribe now, because what Beatrice pulled from that pantry was the first proof that my home had been turned into a trap. I let Beatrice lead me away from the staircase like a man walking in his sleep. The kitchen was still warm from the ovens. Butter, onions, fresh bread, the sharp bite of black pepper. All the ordinary smells of my house, all of them suddenly wrong. She shut the pantry door behind us, and the click of that latch sounded louder than the laughter upstairs. I was still holding the gift in one hand. I remember setting the antique music box on a shelf beside sacks of flour and jars of preserves, as if it belonged there among onions and vinegar. My fingers had gone numb. I asked her one question, and I asked it badly. How long? Beatrice did not pretend not to understand me. Long enough to wound you, she said, but not long enough for me to stay silent tonight. Then she reached up to the top shelf, moved a dented tin marked flour, and brought it down with both hands. There was flour dust all over the lid. It got on her apron, on the dark pantry wood, on my sleeve when she set the tin between us. From a pocket stitched inside her waistband, she pulled a tiny steel key and opened it. Inside, wrapped in butcher paper, was a narrow black ledger with curled corners and a rubber band around it. I stared at it, then at her. "Sir," she said quietly, "before I came into this house, I worked in your docks." That cut through the fog for a second. I knew the harbor offices. I knew the noise, the diesel stink, the fluorescent lights that turned everybody gray by noon. I did not know her from there, and that shamed me at once. She saw it on my face and gave the smallest nod, like she had expected exactly that. "I kept cargo books," she said. "Weights, arrivals, fuel adjustments, berth fees." I was the one who noticed that some vessels were paying twice for the same route under two ownership names. Same hulls, same cargo, different paper. I flagged it. 3 weeks later, I was dismissed for mishandling records. She slid the ledger toward me. The pages were full of neat writing, copied by hand in blue and black ink. My pulse kicked harder with every line. Vessel numbers, registry codes, dates, port clearances. Besides several names from my fleet, she had drawn small red marks. Then another name appeared again and again in the transfer column, a company I had never approved and never seen in any board packet. Blackwake Holdings. At first I thought it was a bookkeeping trick, a way to hide fees, maybe. Then I saw one of my cargo carriers listed under a revised registration route, then another, then a refrigerated ship we used for high-value contracts. Quietly shifted, quietly bled, quietly no longer entirely mine. I looked up at her. "Who signed these?" She drew in a slow breath. Upstairs there was another burst of laughter, softer now, moving across the floorboards above us. I felt it in my teeth. "Some of the filings are through proxies," she said. "Some through harbor intermediaries, but the pattern points inward. This was never done by strangers." I turned another page. There were photocopied slips tucked between the leaves, shipping stamps, partial customs forms, notes in Beatrice's hand. One page had 3 vessel names underlined so hard the pen had almost torn through. The third one made my stomach drop. The Helena Voss, my mother's ship. Nobody touched that vessel without my direct approval. Nobody. I heard my own voice come out thin and strange. Why bring this to me now? For the first time, Beatrice's composure cracked, just a little. Her eyes moved toward the ceiling, toward the rooms above us, and when she looked back at me, there was something heavier than fear in her face. "Because what your wife is doing with that man is only the door you can hear," she whispered. "What they're building behind it has your name on it, and a child's." She pressed one more folded paper into my hand. It was a clinic invoice, and at the top, in Celeste's handwriting, was a surname that was not hers. I unfolded the clinic paper right there between sacks of flour and hanging copper pans, and for a moment I could not make sense of what I was seeing. The surname written at the top was Hawthorne. Celeste had never used that name in her life. Not in business, not socially, not anywhere I knew of. The invoice was old, the edges softened from being handled too many times, and it carried the name of a private maternity wing attached to a hospital I had funded years before through one of our family charities. My own donation plaque was probably still on the wall there. There was a room number, a discharge code, a date from before our wedding. And in the lower corner, written in the same quick slant I had watched on anniversary cards and dinner notes for 10 years, was one sentence: "Keep off household files." I looked at Beatrice. Where did this come from? "Her writing desk," she said, "hidden inside a cookbook she never opens." There are moments when the heart does something strange. It keeps beating, but the rest of you feels delayed, like your body is arriving late to its own disaster. I set the paper down very carefully because I was suddenly afraid I might tear it. Above us, floorboards creaked, one step, then another. Whoever was upstairs had moved closer to the landing. Beatrice lowered her voice even more. Listen to me now and do exactly as I say. If you storm up there, they'll lose an evening. If you stay calm, they may lose everything. I remember staring at her as if I were only then seeing her face for the first time. She had a thin scar near her chin, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a steadiness that did not belong to a frightened servant. She belonged to that other world I should have known better, the one built by people who keep records, notice patterns, and survive being ignored. You took this position on purpose, I said. She nodded once. After they pushed me out of the docks, I spent months trying to prove the vessel transfers. Nobody listened. Then I learned the wife of Damian Voss needed a cook who could live in, keep quiet, and start immediately. I knew the fraud had moved close to the family. I needed to get closer too. You watched my house for years? I watched the paper trail, she said. The house came with it. That answer should have offended me. Instead, it humbled me. Because she was right. While I was signing fleet expansions and hosting investors, somebody else had been paying attention to what I had missed under my own roof. She opened the ledger again and turned to a page I had not seen. This one was different. No vessel numbers at first, just dates, initials, and short notes in the same neat hand. Dinner moved up. Harbormaster stayed late. Legal packet expected Friday. Successor clause revised. One line had been pressed so hard the pen left a grove in the paper. File before month's end if he remains unaware. My mouth went dry. Successor clause? Her eyes held mine. They are preparing more than theft from the company accounts. There is a filing coming. A forged structure for control if you are discredited, absent, or declared unstable. I don't have the full document yet. I know the timing. I know who has been meeting in this house. And I know tonight is part of it. From somewhere above, Celeste laughed again, but this time it was cut short. A door opened. I heard a man murmur something too low to catch. Beatrice reached for the antique music box I had left on the shelf and put it back into my hands, almost gently. You are going upstairs, she said. You are going to smile. You are going to give her this gift. You are going to behave like a husband who suspects nothing. Can you do that? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I would rather burn the whole evening to the ground. But when I looked at the clinic invoice, at Blackwake's entries, at my mother's ship and that book, I understood the trap had already been built around me. So I said the only thing I could. What happens if she asks why I came home early? Beatrice stepped to the pantry door, listened for a breath, then answered without turning back. You tell her the truth about the gift, she said, and you lie about everything else, because if we do this right, before Friday, I can show you the reason that hospital bill matters. Then she opened the door, and I heard Celeste's voice drifting down from the landing. Damian, is that you, darling? I still remember the feel of the banister under my palm, smooth and cool, while my pulse hammered so hard it made my vision seem slightly thin at the edges. Celeste was waiting near the top of the marble stairs in a silk dress the color of pale champagne, one hand resting on the railing, smiling down at me as if she had been standing there all evening thinking tender thoughts about her husband. She looked beautiful. That may be the cruelest part of memory, how faithfully it preserves beauty even after trust has spoiled inside it. Damian, she said, with that warm surprise she could summon on command, you're home early. I lifted the box a little because my voice needed a reason to sound unsteady. Anniversary privilege. She laughed softly and came down 2 steps to kiss my cheek. Her perfume was still fresh, not settled, not faded. Fresh. I caught beneath it a trace of brine and cigar smoke that did not belong to her. My eyes moved past her shoulder toward the bedroom corridor. One door was half closed, another stood open. A crystal tumbler sat on a side table with melting ice and 2 fingers of whiskey left in it. Celeste followed my glance with no visible alarm at all. You just missed Adrian, she said. He dropped by with harbor documents. One of the freighters is delayed again. There are lies people prepare and lies they have practiced. Hers came out too smoothly to have been invented in that moment. On our anniversary? I asked. She gave me a small shrug, almost playful. Ships don't respect romance. Then she touched the box in my hands. Is that for me? I handed it over, and for one suspended second, I thought I might actually break. The box was meant to open the evening. Instead, it became a prop in a scene my wife was already performing better than I was. She lifted the lid, smiled at the velvet lining, then at the tiny brass cylinder inside. When she turned the key, a clear, delicate tune drifted into the hall. It was one she used to hum years ago while getting dressed. I had spent 3 weeks finding that exact melody. "Oh, Damian," she said, and her eyes even glossed over a little. "It's lovely." Maybe there was a shard of truth in that reaction. Maybe not. I no longer knew how to measure her. At dinner, everything felt sharpened. The silver chimed too brightly against the plates. Candlelight threw long shadows along the table runner. Beatrice served sea bass with lemon and herbs, then a fennel salad, moving through the room with her usual quiet control. If anyone had walked in from outside, they would have seen a wealthy couple celebrating 10 years in perfect order. Only I knew that under the linen, my hands were clenched so tight my nails were biting into my palms. Celeste carried the conversation almost single-handedly. She asked about the docks, the board, fuel prices, a captain due back next week. Then, little by little, she steered us somewhere else. "Have you ever thought," she asked, swirling the wine in her glass, "about what happens to everything if life changes quickly?" I kept my eyes on my plate. "That depends on the kind of change." She smiled over the rim of the glass. "I mean legacy, continuity, protection. You've built something enormous. It can't all rest on one heartbeat forever." The words were soft. The meaning under them was not. I made myself chew, swallow, breathe. "That sounds like lawyer talk." "It's practical talk," she said. "Adrian was right earlier. Modern companies survive because smart men plan succession before they need to." There it was again. Adrian. Brought casually into my anniversary dinner as if his name belonged there. Beatrice stepped in to clear the plates. As she lifted mine, her fingers brushed the edge once, and I saw it, a folded scrap tucked beneath the charger. She kept her face lowered and moved on without a sound. Celeste was still speaking about trustees, continuity, how the world punished families who waited too long to put things in order. I opened the paper under the tablecloth with one hand. On it, in Beatrice's neat kitchen print, were 6 words: "Check the guest bath medicine cabinet." And just as I read them, someone tapped lightly at the side entrance off the dining room. The knock came again, light and careful. The kind meant for a side entrance, not a front door. Celeste turned her head toward the sound with a look I knew too well now, a quick calculation hidden inside a smile. "Probably one of the drivers," she said. "They never remember which deliveries can wait." She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and looked back at me as if nothing in the room had shifted. "You were saying?" I had not been saying anything, she knew that. Still, it gave me an opening. "Actually," I said, pushing my chair back, "I need a moment. Too much coffee at the office." She laughed politely. "Romantic timing." I gave her the kind of tired husband smile she expected and walked out before my face betrayed me. The dining room air was thick with candle wax and citrus from the fish. The hall outside felt colder. I could hear Beatrice at the side entrance murmuring to someone in a low voice, stalling them. I did not look that way. I kept walking toward the guest bath off the west corridor, the folded note still warm in my pocket. The medicine cabinet was mirrored and spotless. Celeste liked surfaces that reflected light. I opened it expecting pills, maybe documents behind stacked hand towels, but what I found was stranger. Travel-size soap, aspirin, bandages, and at the very back, behind a jar of bath salts, a slim leather pouch tied with white string. It did not belong in a bathroom. My hand shook as I pulled it forward. Inside were 3 things: First, a hospital wrist tag, faded but readable. Female patient, private maternity ward. Admit under the Hawthorne name. Second, a folded copy of a birth registration abstract with obvious correction marks around the mother's surname and a blacked out line where the father's entry should have been. And third, a tiny silver baby bracelet engraved with one word, Julian. I had to grip the sink to stay upright. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and floor polish, and over that I caught the copper taste of panic rising into my own throat. A son's name. A child had existed in secret close enough for my wife to keep proof of him inside my house. Then I noticed something else. Tucked under the bracelet was a folded receipt from a boy's outfitter. Uniform blazers, 2. Boarding shoes, 1 pair. Trunk label service. The order had been paid through an account I recognized at once, Mariner Outreach Trust, one of the quiet philanthropic branches attached to my company. We funded scholarships for sailors' children through that trust. I had signed its annual review myself. My money, my name, my house, my child, maybe. All folded together in a bathroom cabinet like they had a right to be there. I heard footsteps in the corridor and shut the pouch fast. For one savage second, I thought Celeste had followed me. Instead, it was Beatrice. She slipped in, closed the door, and leaned back against it, breathing through her nose as if she had just finished carrying something heavy. The man at the side door was a courier, she whispered. He brought an envelope marked urgent for Mrs. Voss. I told him she was changing. I showed her the bracelet. Even then, even holding it, I could barely say the name. Julian. Her face changed, not surprise, confirmation. Yes, she said softly, that is the boy. I looked at her. You knew his name? I knew enough to keep waiting for proof. She took the birth abstract from my hand and pointed to the dark block where the father's name should have been. This is not the original record. Someone amended it after the delivery. I've been trying to find where the first version went. From the dining room, Celeste called out brightly, Damian, are you lost in there? Beatrice tucked the pouch back into my hand. Put it in your jacket. Wash your face. Go back smiling. And the courier's envelope? She glanced toward the corridor, then answered in a tone that made the hair rise along my arms. I opened it before I brought it in, she said. It contains a draft succession packet and a school transport notice for a boy being moved on Friday. I slipped the pouch inside my jacket and went back to the dining room with my face wet from the tap and my heart beating like a fist against a licked door. Celeste was still seated when I returned, but the place at her right had changed. A long ivory envelope now rested beside her wineglass, unopened, with a courier stamp across the flap and the embossed mark of Wren Maritime Council in the corner. I knew that firm. They handled transfer structures, offshore holding arrangements, inheritance shields for families who expected war after the funeral. Celeste placed 2 fingers over the envelope the moment she saw me notice it. Sorry, she said lightly, one of those dull little legal things that breed when you own too much. I sat down. My chair sounded too loud against the floor. I thought dull legal things usually waited until morning. Her smile held. Only if the lawyers are polite. Beatrice brought in dessert then, a dark orange tart with sugar burned across the top. The smell of caramel hit the table, rich and bitter. Celeste thanked her without looking up. I watched Beatrice set down the plates, and in that ordinary gesture, there was a strange steadiness. She was serving pastry while my marriage cracked open inch by inch. She did not once let her hand tremble. Celeste cut a small piece of tart and tried again to steer the night. She talked about a board luncheon next week, a captain's retirement dinner, a gala for the Outreach Trust. That last one caught in me. The trust had paid for the boys' uniforms. She kept speaking as if she had not just brushed a match across my nerves. I may ask Adrian to attend in your place if you're tied up, she said. He has such a good face for public reassurance. I met her eyes. Adrian seems to have a face for many things lately. There was a pause. Tiny. Sharp. Then she laughed, just enough. You men at the harbor become dramatic when schedules go wrong. I let it pass. That was the hardest work I have ever done in my life, sitting still while every instinct in me wanted to throw the truth onto the table like broken glass. When dinner finally ended, Celeste rose with the envelope in hand and came around behind my chair. Her fingers settled on my shoulders with practiced affection. "Don't stay up buried in numbers tonight," she murmured near my ear. "For once, leave the company to other people." Then she kissed my temple and carried that envelope toward the blue sitting room, where she took private calls when she did not want them echoing through the hall. I waited exactly 30 seconds before standing. Beatrice was already in the passage by the back pantry when I reached it. She had removed her apron, folded it over one arm, and looked less like a cook than a woman about to brief a commander before a storm. "She won't open it in front of you," she said. "She'll read it alone first, then decide how much to feed you. What's in the packet besides Friday's filing? Enough to strip you in stages." She led me into the breakfast room, smaller than the dining room, darker, with windows facing the back drive. Temporary incapacity clauses, emergency trustee language, control transfer if the board believes your judgment is impaired by stress. I stared at her. Stress. She nodded. "You've been overworked for months. Everyone knows it. You've said it yourself in public. That makes it useful." The room smelled faintly of cold tea and furniture polish. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door clicked shut. Celeste, moving, listening maybe. Beatrice opened a drawer and took out 2 folded sheets she had hidden beneath linen napkins. One was a copied routing page from the courier packet. The other was a page of dates in her handwriting. "These," she said, tapping the list, "are the weeks Celeste disappeared from public events before your wedding. Every one of them matches clinic entries under the false surname. And tomorrow morning, Adrian expects you at Harbor Pier 7 for a routine fuel review. It isn't routine. The transfer vessel from Blackwake will be there." I looked from the dates to the copied routing page and then back to her. "You're telling me my anniversary dinner was cover for company theft, a hidden child, and a legal coup. I'm telling you," she said, very calm, "that by Friday they mean to have your signature somewhere they can use." A floorboard creaked in the corridor outside. Beatrice went silent at once, and the brass handle on the breakfast room door began to turn. The handle moved down slowly, then stopped halfway, as if the person outside had changed their mind. Beatrice did not even blink. She crossed the breakfast room in 3 quick steps, lifted the silver coffee pot from the sideboard, and set it on the table between us like that had been her reason for coming in all along. By the time the door opened, she had become the cook again. Quiet shoulders, lowered gaze, nothing in her face but household routine. It was Celeste. She stood in the doorway with the legal envelope tucked under one arm, smiling in that light, careless way she used when she wanted to seem harmless. "There you are," she said to me. "I was starting to think I'd lost my husband to bookkeeping on our anniversary." I leaned one hip against the table and forced myself to look tired instead of hunted. Beatrice was making coffee. I thought it might help me stay awake long enough to enjoy the rest of the evening. Celeste's eyes drifted across the room. Napkins in the drawer, empty cups, the polished wood. Then to Beatrice. If she suspected anything, she buried it fast. "You spoil him," she told her. Beatrice gave a small nod. "Would you like a cup as well, ma'am?" "No, thank you." Celeste turned back to me, and for one strange second she studied my face more closely than she had all evening. "You do look worn out, Damian. Maybe I was right at dinner. Maybe you need to start letting other people carry more weight." The words were soft. The envelope under her arm made them feel sharp. I gave a tired laugh. If I did that, half the line would run aground. She came farther into the room then, close enough to adjust my tie with one hand. An intimate gesture, familiar, cruel. That's exactly what men say before they overestimate themselves. There was a faint scent of ink on the envelope, fresh paper and sealing glue. She had already opened it somewhere else, then tucked the contents back inside. That told me 2 things. First, whatever was in there mattered enough that she did not want me seeing her reaction. Second, she still thought she had time. "I've got an early harbor meeting," I said. "Pier 7. That landed, very slightly. Her fingers paused at my collar. "With Adrian?" she asked. "With the fuel team." She smiled again, but it came a fraction late. "Then don't let him drown you in delay reports before breakfast." When she finally left, the room stayed still for a full 5 seconds. I listened to her heels fade down the corridor, then up the back stairs toward the blue sitting room. A door shut upstairs, gentle and precise. Beatrice let out one breath through her nose. "She's checking whether you know more than you should." She almost asked outright. "She won't. Not until Friday. Right now, they still need your cooperation." I looked at the closed door and then back at her. "What's at Pier 7 besides a transfer vessel?" She hesitated, and that was new. Until then, she had answered everything with the calm of someone who had already walked the thought through 10 times alone. "There is a dock archive room near the fuel office," she said at last. "Old manifests, incident reports, employee records. Most of it should have been digitized years ago. It wasn't. Adrian uses the room because nobody bothers with paper anymore. And I believe there is a second ledger there, the real one, not the one I copied from scraps and duplicate filings. The original record of which ships were bled, who signed them out, and where the money went." My pulse started climbing again. "If that ledger exists," I said, "why haven't you taken it?" Her eyes lowered for the first time that night. "Because the last time I went near that room," she said quietly, "I saw a photograph on Adrian's desk. A school portrait of a boy in uniform. On the back, in Celeste's hand, were 4 words. She reached into her apron pocket, took out a torn scrap she had carried for years, and placed it in my palm. "Protect him until Friday." I read those 4 words twice, then folded the scrap so carefully you would have thought it was made of glass. Protect him until Friday. Not move the funds, not secure the ships. Him. A child had become the center of all this. A child hidden inside legal tricks, false names, and stolen authority. I looked up at Beatrice, and for the first time that night, I stopped seeing only the scandal and started seeing the shape of the plan around it. "They're not just preparing to rob me," I said. "No," she answered. "They're preparing to replace you." The breakfast room suddenly felt too small. The windows showed only the black yard beyond the house, and my own reflection floated faintly in the glass like somebody else's ghost. I could hear Celeste moving overhead, slow footsteps, then silence. Waiting, perhaps reading, perhaps sending a message to Adrian while I stood downstairs trying to understand how many years of my life had been staged around me. I pressed my palms to the table and forced myself back into the practical world, the one I understood best. "Tell me exactly what you saw in that archive room." Beatrice sat down across from me, which she had never done in my presence before. That simple act told me how far the night had shifted. "Adrian was there after hours," she said. "The door was open a few inches. I had gone down to the lower dock kitchens to ask about a supply bill. I saw the photograph first, propped beside a green lamp. School uniform. Boy of about 9, maybe 10 at the time. Dark hair. Serious face." Then Adrian turned, and behind him on the desk was a bound register thicker than the one I copied. Harbor stamps, vessel seals, transfer sheets all in one place. "The original ledger." She nodded. I was about to step away when he picked up the photograph. He smiled at it. And then Celeste's message slip fell from between the frame and the backing board. That was the line written on it. A strange cold moved through me. Not fear exactly. Recognition. I had seen that kind of planning before in hostile takeovers, when men spoke warmly over lunch and buried knives in contracts by dusk. Only this was inside my house, and the warm voice belonged to my wife. "Why Friday?" I asked. "Because that is when the school transport moves the boy." She watched my face carefully. "And because the filing packet becomes useful only if all the pieces line up together. Vessel transfers, trustee language, successor narrative, a protected child place where they can present him when it suits them. The words successor narrative stayed with me. They sounded clean, professional. They hid rot underneath. I reached inside my jacket and took out the silver baby bracelet again. Julian. The name sat in my palm like an accusation. I thought of all the years Celeste and I had gone through the quiet humiliation of not having children. The delicate doctor phrases, the private consolations, the way she once cried in the car and said fate had closed that door on us. If this boy was mine, then that grief had not been grief alone. It had been management. Beatrice saw where my thoughts had gone. "Do not decide everything tonight," she said softly. "You need proof strong enough to survive daylight." I gave a short, humorless laugh. Daylight. At this point, I'm not sure I want it to come. "It will come anyway," she said, "and when it does, Adrian will expect you at Pier 7. That pulled me back. If I go, I walk into his ground. If I don't, they know I'm unsettled. "You have to go." I looked at her. "And you?" "I'll do what I've been doing for years. Watch, listen. Keep the house steady so they do not smell smoke." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked again, followed by the faintest vibration of my phone on the table. I knew that number before I even looked. Adrian Pike. And his message was only one line long. "Need your signature tomorrow before noon." I did not answer Adrian's message right away. I stood there with the phone in one hand and that torn scrap in the other, listening to the house settle around me. Pipes clicked somewhere in the walls. A far-off door shut upstairs. The old clock in the back hall gave one dry little tick after another, as if time itself had decided to become audible just to mock me. Beatrice watched my face, waiting to see whether I would react like a husband or think like a man who ran ships for a living. "When a harbor master says before noon," I said at last, "he means the paperwork is already printed." "Yes," she said, "and he expects speed, not questions." I typed back 3 words, "I'll be there." The reply came so fast it felt as though he had been staring at the screen. "Good, bring seal." My company seal, not just a signature. That meant formal authorization, vessel-level transfer power, and maybe something tied to the trust accounts as well. Adrian was not fishing. He was reaching for a specific piece of machinery, and he wanted it while he still believed I was blind. Beatrice took a folded dish towel from the sideboard and wrapped it around the silver bracelet before handing it back to me. "Hide that somewhere she never checks." I slipped it into the inside pocket of my overnight case. "I'm not sleeping in our room tonight." "You must if she expects it." I looked at her. "You want me to lie beside her after tonight?" "No," she said quietly. "I want you to survive Friday." That settled it more than any argument could have. I took the case and went upstairs a few minutes later, moving at a normal pace, not too fast, not too careful. Celeste was in the dressing room when I entered our suite. I could hear drawers sliding, hangers touching, the soft clink of glass bottles on the vanity. The bedroom lamps were low. The bed had already been turned down. On the nightstand beside my side of the bed sat the antique music box, open now, its little brass cylinder catching the light. She had placed it there like a loving wife preserving a sweet moment. When she came out, she was brushing her hair, a white robe tied loosely at the waist, every picture of ease. "I thought you disappeared into ship reports forever," she said. "Tempting," I answered. She smiled and sat at the vanity. Through the mirror, she watched me loosen my tie. "You have that look again." "What look?" "The one that means you're carrying 5 storms in your head at once." That line would have touched me once. That night it felt like reconnaissance. I gave her something half true. "Pier 7 is already a nuisance for tomorrow." "Adrian will handle it," she said almost too quickly. Then she corrected herself. "Or help you handle it." I opened my cufflinks slowly. He texted, "Wants my seal." She stopped brushing for the smallest fraction of a second. Just enough. "At this hour?" That bothered me too. Her brush resumed. Well, if it's routine, get it done early. No reason to drag these things out. Routine. Again. The word had started to stink. I crossed to the window and looked down at the back drive. A dark sedan was pulling away from the service entrance. Likely the courier, or someone collecting instructions. In the glass, I could see Celeste watching me watch the car. "Did something upset you tonight?" she asked, soft as silk. I turned back. "Why would you ask that?" She set the brush down and stood. "Because I know you, and because lately you've been tired in a way that worries me." There it was again. Worries me. Overtired, too much pressure. Little phrases like nails laid out in a line. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated a second time. This one was not from Adrian. Unknown number. The message contained no greeting, no signature, only a photograph of a boy in school uniform stepping into a black car, and beneath it, one sentence. "He leaves sooner if you refuse." I locked my phone screen before Celeste could see the photograph, but the damage was already done inside me. She was still watching from the vanity mirror, brush in hand, waiting for whatever answer my face might betray. I slipped the phone into my pocket and crossed to the wardrobe with what I hoped passed for ordinary annoyance. "Pure nonsense," I said. "Somebody at the harbor has decided the night is the perfect time to invent urgency." Celeste gave a sympathetic little smile. "That's what happens when everyone depends on you." The sentence should have sounded admiring. Instead, it landed like bait. I took my seal case from the lower drawer and set it on the dresser where she could see it. If she wanted proof that Adrian had reached me, I would give her exactly that proof and nothing more. "He wants this by noon," I said. Her eyes dropped to the case, then back to me. "Then I suppose you'd better not oversleep." I laughed once through my nose. That would imply I'm planning to sleep. She stood, came over, and laid one hand against my chest through my shirt. Light pressure. Familiar warmth. The kind of touch that used to calm me. "Damian," she said softly, "you don't have to carry every crisis alone." That was when I understood something ugly and useful. They were already shaping a story about me. Overworked, frayed, burdened. A man too tired to tell the difference between devotion and handling. If Friday's papers needed a reason for control to slide elsewhere, my exhaustion would be written into the margins long before I ever saw the page. I lay down beside her later, fully dressed except for my jacket, staring at the ceiling while she settled under the blankets with the easy breath of someone who believed the board was already tilted in her favor. At some point after midnight, when her breathing grew heavier, I turned my head a fraction and saw a pale rectangle of light on the far wall. Her phone screen, face down on the bedside table, still glowing from a new message. I waited. The room was dark except for that small wash of blue. I counted her breaths. 20, 30, 40. Then I slid my hand across the table, lifted the phone, and angled it just enough to read the preview without unlocking it. It was from Adrian. "Courier packet updated. He suspects nothing. Bring outreach file Friday." Outreach file. I eased the phone back down with such care that my wrist hurt. My own charitable trust again. The one linked to scholarships and seafarers' families. The one that had already paid for a hidden boy's uniforms. Friday wasn't only about vessel transfers or trustee language. They needed something from that file. A name, perhaps. A beneficiary trail. A legal bridge between my company and the child they were keeping out of sight. I did not sleep after that. Before dawn, I rose quietly, took the seal case, and went downstairs. The house was blue with early morning shadow. The kitchen lights were already on. Beatrice stood at the stove in a plain dark sweater instead of her apron, heating coffee in a small steel pot. The smell hit me first, strong, bitter, honest. I had never been so grateful for anything in my own house. She turned when she heard me. One look at my face and she set down the spoon. "You saw something." I told her about the unknown message, the photo, Adrian's second text, and the note on Celeste's screen. She listened without interrupting, hands folded around the coffee mug she had not yet filled. When I finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out a folded map of the harbor district, yellowed at the creases. She placed it on the table and pressed one finger to Pier 7. Fuel off is here, she said. Archive room here. Transfer dock here. If Adrian wants your seal before noon, he needs you to approve something before a vessel clears. I leaned over the map. My coffee sat untouched, sending up thin steam between us. "And the outreach file?" I asked. Beatrice looked at me for a long second, then went to the pantry shelf. From behind a tin of bay leaves, she drew out a small key card in a plastic sleeve. Harbor Administrative Access. Expired on paper. Maybe not in the old system. "I took this the week they fired me," she said. "I never found the courage to use it." She slid it across the table. "Today," she whispered, "you may need more than your seal." And then my phone rang again, this time with a live call from Adrian, earlier than any honest harbor meeting should begin. The ringtone seemed far too loud for that hour. I looked at Beatrice. She gave one small nod, the kind that means there is no safe version of this, only a necessary one. So I answered and put the phone to my ear while the coffee steamed between us. "Adrian." "Damian." His voice came smooth, alert, already dressed for business. I could hear gulls behind him and the hollow clang of metal from the harbor. He was on site. "Sorry for the early call. I wanted to get ahead of the day." "By dragging mine forward before sunrise?" He gave a short laugh. "You know how it goes. If we don't handle this before the traffic starts, we lose half a day." There was a pause then, small, careful. He was listening to my tone, testing for splinters. I leaned against the counter and made myself sound irritated in the ordinary way. Tired, busy, blind. "What am I signing?" I asked. "Routine authorization on a fuel transfer and a temporary berth reassignment. One vessel needs clean paper before noon or we'll have delays clear through next week." He said it too neatly. "Bring the company seal and the trust file I mentioned to Celeste last week." That tightened something in my chest. So she knew about the file already. Maybe she had offered it. Maybe she had let him believe she could steer me toward it with one hand on my tie and a soft voice in the dark. "I must have missed that conversation," I said. "Probably. You've had a lot on your plate." There it was again, the same phrase in a different mouth. Too much on my plate, overstretched, tired. They had been building this language together, laying down a version of me they could present later if needed. I let out a slow breath into the receiver. "Fine. Pier 7, give me an hour." "Make it less," he said, still warm, still friendly. "And Damian, leave the board packet at home today. This one is simpler than that." He ended the call before I could answer. Beatrice had heard enough from my side to understand where it was headed. She poured the coffee at last and pushed the mug toward me. The ceramic was hot against my fingers. "He doesn't want you bringing anything that might make you compare papers." No board packet, no extra eyes, just my sill and a trust file. I took one swallow. It was strong enough to bite. That means the outreach records are not a side detail. They're part of the bridge. Beatrice moved to the side shelf, reached behind a stack of preserving jars, and brought down a thin canvas document case. "Then you need to know what may already be in that bridge." Inside were photocopies, clipped together in sets. These came from my own household office. Donation approvals, scholarship disbursements, medical grants through the trust. Beatrice had marked several entries with pencil dots in the margins. I turned pages. Most were ordinary. A widow's support fund, tuition assistance, emergency surgery for a captain's daughter. Then I found the marked line that made me stop. Guardian stipend, minor beneficiary, St. Bartholomew Coastal Academy. No child's name, only an account code. But the payment schedule was regular, private, and old enough to go back years. "How did you get these?" I asked. "Celeste leaves invoices mixed with household correspondence when she's in a hurry. I copy what matters and put it back before breakfast." I looked down again. One later payment included outfitting charges and transport coordination. Another referenced educational discretion. That phrase chilled me more than any outright lie. Educational discretion. The polished language of hiding a boy in plain sight. I flipped to the last photocopy in the set. This one was newer. Approved for release Friday upon family status confirmation. My eyes lifted to hers. Family status. Beatrice nodded, but she did not speak. She was watching the back door. A car had just rolled over the gravel outside. Not one of mine. Dark sedan, harbor plates. And before either of us could move, someone knocked sharply at the kitchen entrance and called through the glass in Adrian's unmistakable voice. "Morning, Damian. Hope you're decent. I thought I'd save you the drive." For 1 second, neither Beatrice nor I moved. Then she took the document case from the table, slid it beneath a sack of flour with one clean motion, and reached for the coffee pot as if that had been her whole morning. I picked up my mug and turned just as Adrian opened the kitchen door without waiting to be invited. He came in smiling, wind on his coat, harbor cold still clinging to him. He always carried the docks in with him: salt, diesel, wet rope, metal. Usually it smelled like work. That morning it smelled like trespass. His eyes found me first, then the table, then Beatrice, who was already pouring a second cup as if a surprise visit from my harbor master at dawn was the most natural thing in the world. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "You are," I answered, then gave him the tired grin he would expect from me. "Which means something's actually wrong." He laughed and stepped farther in. "Fair enough." Up close, he looked too fresh for a man claiming urgency. Clean shave, crisp collar, no sign of having been up all night fighting delays. This had been planned. He glanced toward the back windows, then to the hall, checking the house by instinct, or by habit. That bothered me more than it should have. Beatrice set a cup in front of him. "Coffee, sir." "Bless you," he said, and sat at the kitchen table like he belonged there. That was the trick of men like Adrian. They borrowed belonging from other people's lives and wore it with ease. I had mistaken that confidence for loyalty for years. I sat opposite him and let the silence stretch just enough for him to fill it. "Pier 7 is a mess," he said, pulling a slim folder from under his arm. "Fuel reroute, berth congestion, a clearance issue on the Norwind. Nothing dramatic, just paper. I figured if I came here, we could save ourselves an hour." He pushed the folder toward me. I opened it slowly. The top sheet was exactly the kind of thing a tired executive might sign on instinct. Routine formatting, familiar headers, enough technical clutter to make the eyes slide past what mattered. But now I knew how to look, and once I looked, I saw it. The vessel named on the page was not the Norwind. It was the Helena Voss, my mother's ship. I kept my expression flat and turned the page. Beneath the transfer authorization sat an attached berth reassignment request. Temporary on its face, but it shifted administrative control for 72 hours to an operations proxy linked to Blackwake's filing code. Not full ownership, not yet. Just a legal doorway wide enough to wheel valuables through. Adrian sipped his coffee. "You all right?" "Need more caffeine before I pretend to understand maritime law before sunrise." "Since when do you pretend?" he said warmly. Beatrice moved to the stove, giving us her back, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. She had seen the ship name, too. I flipped another page. Tucked behind the berth form was a trust addendum. 3 lines only. Release of educational support under amended family status review. It was written in the same polished language as the photocopies from the trust file. He had brought the bridge to my own kitchen. "Why is a vessel packet carrying trust language?" I asked, making my tone mildly annoyed, not alarmed. Adrian did not miss a beat. "Accounting overlap. One of the outreach shipments rode the same clearance chain. Easier to process both while we have your seal out. There are lies that insult you by how casually they are offered. This was one of them." I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my jaw like an exhausted man thinking about nothing more than paperwork. "You came all the way here because of an accounting overlap?" "I came," he said, lowering his voice just a touch, "because the board has started asking questions about continuity, and because I'd rather protect you from noise before it becomes gossip." Continuity. The same words Celeste had used at dinner. Then footsteps sounded in the hall behind us, light and familiar, and Celeste's voice floated toward the kitchen, soft with morning ease. "Oh, good," she said. "You've already found each other." And when I looked up, she was wearing the expression of a woman arriving exactly on cue. Celeste came into the kitchen, tying the belt of her robe, hair still loose from sleep. And if I had not known better, I might have believed I was looking at a wife surprised to find business at her breakfast table. "Adrian," she said with easy warmth, "you could have waited until civilized hours." He stood halfway, smiling at her in that careful, practiced way people use when they need to look respectful in front of the wrong witness. "I tried the civilized route. Your husband insists on making himself difficult before coffee." She laughed, and I watched the exchange as if from a great distance. Too smooth, too familiar. Not the heat from the night before, but something colder and more dangerous. Coordination. Celeste moved behind my chair and rested her hand on my shoulder for just a second. "Sign whatever he needs," she said. "Then maybe you can both stop treating a dock delay like a national emergency." There it was, gentle pressure wrapped in domestic humor. I looked down at the folder again, then up at Adrian. "You brought me a birth proxy tied to the Helena Voss." He did not flinch. "Temporary paper only. 3 days." 3 days is enough to sink a vessel if the wrong hands touch the routing. Celeste's fingers tightened once on my shoulder, then lifted away. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on the table, coffee untouched now. "Damian, come on, you know me. I wouldn't put anything dangerous in front of you." That line might have worked a week earlier, maybe a day earlier. That morning, it landed like a polished insult. I let the silence breathe. Then I did something I had not planned until that exact second. I closed the folder. No. Both of them went still. I kept my tone level, annoyed, almost bored. Not here. Not in my kitchen. Not before I see the harbor originals, the fuel stamps, and the birth board with my own eyes. If this is routine, you lose nothing by waiting 30 minutes. If it isn't, then you've both just saved me from signing blind before breakfast. Adrian's jaw hardened so slightly most people would have missed it. I did not. Celeste moved around to face me. "Both?" she asked, smiling, but the word had edges. I lifted one shoulder. "You're the one telling me to sign." For the first time that morning, neither of them had an answer ready. Then Celeste recovered. "Of course she did." "He's right," she said to Adrian, though her eyes stayed on me. "If he wants to inspect it in person, let him. You know how he is with legacy vessels." Legacy vessels. She chose the phrase carefully, as if reminding me I was sentimental, predictable, easy to guide by touching the right old loyalties. Adrian gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, Pier 7 then. But bring the seal. We'll settle it there." "I always do," I said. That got him. His eyes flicked once toward the dresser hall, where he must have guessed the seal case waited. He had expected the paper to be signed in the kitchen and the morning to stay small. Now he had to take me onto his ground with the game still unfinished. Celeste stepped back to the counter and reached for a plate as if the whole exchange had bored her. "Beatrice, would you send up breakfast in 20 minutes?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Beatrice never looked at me. She did not need to. I understood. Stay ordinary, stay moving. I rose, took the folder, and slipped it under my arm. "I'll change and meet you outside." Adrian stood too. "Don't take long." When he and Celeste left the kitchen ahead of me, their voices dropped at once in the corridor. Not low enough to hide the fact of private speech, just low enough to deny content. Beatrice moved closer the moment they disappeared. "You did well," she whispered. "Did I?" "You made him show impatience." I looked toward the door. And now I walk into Pier 7 with a man who knows I looked at his paper properly. She reached into her sweater pocket and pressed a tiny folded slip into my hand. Harbor locker number, 2 digits circled twice. "I didn't tell you before," she said. "The last time I saw the real ledger, Adrian locked it away after taking something else out first." "What?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "A school visitor log," she said. and the name signed beside the boy's was yours. I closed my hand around that locker number and felt the paper bite into my palm. A school visitor log signed with my name. For a second, the kitchen, the harbor folder, Celeste's robe, Adrian's face, all of it seemed to tilt. Somebody had not only hidden a child from me, they had been building a false trail in my name. That meant planning across years, not months. It meant whoever controlled that log expected a day when they could say, I knew, I visited, I approved, I abandoned. Adrian was still standing there waiting for my answer, and Celeste was watching me with that soft, morning expression that had become, in less than one day, more frightening than open cruelty. I slid the folded slip into my trouser pocket and gave Adrian a short nod. Fine, Pier 7. Good, he said at once, too quickly. I'll go ahead and have the office opened. Office, not dock, not fuel desk. Office. He had told me where he wanted me without meaning to. Celeste stepped closer and straightened the front of my jacket as though she were sending her husband off to some small inconvenience. Try not to turn this into a war before lunch, she said. That depends, I answered, taking the folder from the table, on whether your harbor master has brought me a delay or a headache. She smiled. With you, it's usually both. I walked out before either of them could study my face any longer. Upstairs, I changed into a charcoal suit and switched the contents of my pockets with deliberate care. Seal case, phone, wallet, the expired harbor card from Beatrice, the folded slip with the locker number. I left the baby bracelet hidden where I had put it. When I opened the bedside drawer for my cufflinks, I saw the antique music box sitting there, lid half open, silent now. Just a gift from yesterday, already belonging to another life. I shut the drawer and went down by the side stairs, avoiding the main hall. My driver was off that morning, which suited me. Adrian had come in his own car, and I had no intention of sitting beside him in a closed space. I took my coupe from the back garage and left the estate 2 minutes behind him, keeping enough distance that his brake lights showed red without letting him think I was trailing. The harbor was already awake when I arrived. Forklifts whining, chains clanking, diesel thick in the air, gulls screaming over the loading cranes, water slapping hard against pilings blackened by years of salt. Pier 7 sat farther down from the passenger terminals, where the polished parts of the business ended and the real metal began. Adrian's sedan was parked outside the fuel office, exactly where he wanted it seen. I did not go straight in. Instead, I took the outer catwalk along the maintenance shed, a route only regular dockmen used when they wanted to avoid the front office chatter. The steel grating vibrated under my shoes. Wind shoved at my coat. Beneath me, the tide boiled around the pilings in cold, gray loops. From there, I had a narrow view into the side of the office through wired glass. Adrian was inside already. He was not alone. Celeste stood with him in the archive room beyond the main office, still in the same pale robe under a dark coat thrown hurriedly over it. So she had not gone back upstairs to breakfast. She had come straight here behind me or ahead of me by another route. She leaned over a desk while Adrian opened a metal locker fixed to the far wall. Locker. The same one, maybe. I could not see the number from where I stood. He took out a large bound book, heavier than the harbor folder he'd brought to my kitchen, and set it down beside a smaller black binder and what looked like a school file tied with blue string. Celeste touched the school file first. Then Adrian turned one page toward her, and even through the wired glass I saw the clear square of a photograph clipped inside. A boy in uniform. And before I could get closer, someone behind me said, very quietly, "Sir, you're not supposed to be on this walkway." I turned and found one of the old pier watchmen standing 3 steps behind me, cap pulled low against the wind. He was broad through the shoulders, gray at the temples, with a rain jacket zipped to the throat and a clipboard tucked under one arm. I knew his face, though the name took a second to rise. Nolan. He had worked security on the outer piers long before Adrian ever got a management title. His eyes moved from me to the wired glass window and back again, and in that glance, I understood he had seen enough to know this was no ordinary inspection. "Morning, Mr. Voss," he said quietly. "Didn't expect to find you on the catwalk. Seems I'm full of surprises today." He gave the smallest twitch of a mouth, not quite a smile. "That makes two of us." Through the glass, Adrian shifted position, turning his body so the locker and the desk were partly shielded from the window. Celeste stepped back from the school file and picked up a sheet from the larger book. They were talking, but the steel and wind swallowed the words. Nolan lowered his voice even more. "If you're trying not to be seen, this is the wrong side of the office." "You going to stop me?" He looked at the room again, then at the pier below, where a fuel hose was being dragged across wet concrete by two deckhands. "Depends what you need." That answer landed hard, not because it was dramatic, because it was practical. Men who spend their lives around docks do not waste words when they smell a shift in tide. "I need 2 minutes," I said, "and maybe a favor." He studied me. Rich men like me often imagine loyalty belongs upward by default. It does not. It has to be earned, and it can be lost without your noticing. In that moment, I did not know whether I had ever earned anything from Nolan beyond a paycheck. But I knew Adrian had. Nolan reached into his jacket pocket and produced a ring of service keys, old brass tagged with flaking paint. He separated one small steel key from the rest and pressed it into my hand. "Archive side door," he said, "at the end of the maintenance passage. It sticks. Lift and turn." My fingers closed over it before I even thanked him. He nodded toward the office window. "If you go in there, do it now. They've already sent the forklift team to move the tanker from Bay 3. That means the outer lane will be empty in less than a minute. After that, anybody looking this way will have a clear sight line." I looked once more through the glass. Adrian had the black binder open now. Celeste was pointing to something lower on the page. The blue Tide school file lay open enough for me to see the edge of a cream card tucked inside. Not a photograph this time. A formal card. School issue, maybe. Identification. "Why help me?" I asked. Nolan's face did something tired and old. "Because 3 years ago I filed a report on clearance mismatches tied to Blackwake and got told to mind gate locks and leave paper to smarter men. Because I've watched good deck crews get reassigned for asking plain questions. And because last month I saw a boy come through this pier under private escort with your surname scratched off a trunk label in black marker." My throat tightened. "You're sure?" He met my eyes. I was close enough to smell the ink. The wind hit us again, sharp and wet. Somewhere behind the fuel office, a horn gave one blunt warning blast. Nolan glanced toward the lane and stepped back. "Maintenance passage," he said. "End door on the left. If anyone asks, I never saw you on this walkway." I moved at once, crouching lower as I came off the catwalk and cut behind the corrugated wall of the pump shed. The passage was narrow, damp, and smelled of rust and old rope. My shoes splashed through shallow puddles. At the end, exactly where Nolan said, was a gray metal door with paint blistered by salt. I slid the key in. It stuck. For one awful second, it would not turn. Then I lifted, twisted hard, and felt the lock give with a dry internal snap. Inside, voices were suddenly close. Adrian's first. "No, not that page," he said. "If he sees the original entry, we lose the story." I froze with my hand still on the door handle and listened. Celeste answered first, her voice low and sharpened in a way I had never heard when she spoke to me. "Then we don't let him see the original entry." "He'll ask for the trust support history too," Adrian said. Papers shifted. A locker hinge clicked softly. "If he compares dates, the academy payments line up too cleanly with the transfer from the clinic." Clinic. There it was. No more vague hints, no more polite language. In that cramped maintenance passage with rust smell in my nose and harbor wind whining through the seam of the door, I heard the hidden machinery of my life spoken plainly. Celeste gave a short breath, almost impatient. Then we show him the amended version, the one with the guardian sequence fixed. By Friday, none of this matters if the board accepts the incapacity clause. Incapacity clause. I shut my eyes for one brief second. My wife was standing 10 feet away discussing my removal from my own company with the man she had just been in bed with, and they were doing it like people planning table settings. Adrian spoke again, softer now. "You're still sure about tonight?" "Yes," she said. "He's rattled, but he still thinks like a decent man. He wants order. He always wants order. That's why this works." That sentence cut deeper than anything else. Not because it insulted me, because it was true. I did want order. I wanted things to make sense. I wanted papers to match facts, vows to mean something, and kindness to be returned with the same hand that received it. They had turned that part of me into a tool. A chair leg scraped inside. I had seconds, maybe less. I eased the side door wider and slipped into the archive passage. It opened into a narrow back corridor lined with dented filing cabinets, old harbor charts, and shelves of rolled manifests tied with cord. The air was stale with dust, mildew, old ink. Voices carried from the office ahead, close now, but partly blocked by a half-open partition. To my left, painted in white over a row of old metal compartments, were locker numbers. I found the one from Beatrice's slip. The key was already in my hand before my mind caught up. It fit on the second try. The lock stuck, then gave. Inside was not one ledger, but three things stacked tight. A thick bound register with harbor stamps along the spine, a black school binder, and a cream visitor book edged in blue cloth. I took the visitor book first. My hands had gone so cold I almost dropped it. I opened to the marked ribbon near the middle. Page after page of names, dates, signatures, student references. Then there it was. Julian Hawthorne. Guardian contact escorted through private gate. Below it, in blue ink shaped to resemble my hand, a false signature. Damian Voss. I knew at once it wasn't mine. The downstroke was wrong, too deliberate, too studied. Someone had copied my signature from formal contracts. Not from the quick way I signed anything personal, but a board, a court, a school clerk years later, they might never look that closely. Beneath that entry were three more visits, one by Celeste under the Hawthorne alias, one by Adrian using only his initials, and one line, later than the others, that made my mouth go dry. Family status review pending. Keep father uninformed. A floorboard creaked inside the office. I looked up. The voices had stopped. Then Adrian said, much closer than before, "Did you hear something?" I shoved the visitor book back into the locker and pulled the black binder free instead. If I left everything disturbed, they'd know. If I took nothing, I'd lose the chance. I had one object in my hands and one breath left to choose. Then Celeste said, calm and deadly quiet, "Check the passage." I had no time to think my way through it, so I moved on instinct. The black binder went under my jacket. I shoved the visitor book back into the locker, left the larger register where it was, and pulled the metal door closed just as footsteps crossed the office floor. My pulse was beating so hard I could feel it in my gums. I stepped sideways into a recess between two filing cabinets stacked with rolled birth plans and held my breath. The partition door opened. Adrian entered first. I could see only part of him through a gap between the cabinet edge and a hanging chart. Dark coat, right hand braced on the frame, head turned slightly, listening. Celeste stayed just beyond him. I saw the pale edge of her sleeve and the toe of one shoe. "Probably Nolan," Adrian said, though he did not sound convinced. "Then why did the side door move?" Celeste asked. Her voice was low, flat, and stripped of every softness she ever used with me. There are moments when betrayal stops being emotional and becomes technical. Hearing her like that did it. She was not nervous. She was managing variables. Adrian stepped farther into the passage. One more stride and he would see me. Then a forklift horn blared outside, long and angry, followed by a crash of dropped chain. Adrian cursed under his breath and half turned toward the sound. In that tiny break, I reached behind me and shoved a leaning stack of rolled charts. They slid off the shelf and thumped to the floor farther down the corridor. Adrian spun toward the noise. I used those 2 seconds to move the other way, silent as I could, and slipped through the maintenance door I had entered by. The rusty edge scraped my sleeve. I pulled it shut without letting it slam, and kept walking until I was around the bend of the passage, out of sight, wind hitting my face so hard it felt like surf. Behind me, the door burst open. "Who's there?" Adrian shouted. I didn't run. Running gets noticed. I walked fast along the service lane, crossed behind a stack of mooring crates, and came out toward the fuel office front just as if I had been circling from the parking area all along. By the time Adrian came around the building, I was standing beside my car with the seal case in one hand and his folder in the other. He slowed when he saw me. For one perfect second, surprise cracked across his face before he covered it. "There you are," he said. "I thought you'd gone wandering." I lifted the folder. Had to take a call. You know how it is. Celeste appeared behind him a heartbeat later, composed again, the school file nowhere in sight. "Everything all right?" she asked. I looked directly at her. "Depends how much of my morning is still being called routine." She smiled, but her eyes searched mine hard. "You really are in a mood today." "Let's get this done," I said. Inside the front office, Adrian tried to steer me toward the desk with the kitchen papers still on top, but I had seen too much already to play that role. I set the folder down and kept standing. "Not until I see the birth board and fuel clearance stamps," I said. "And not here, in the control room." He hesitated. That was all I needed. "Since when?" he asked. "Since someone thought the Helena Voss could move on proxy authority before breakfast." That landed. Celeste looked at him, only for an instant, but it was enough. They had not expected me to notice the vessel name that clearly. Good. Adrian gave a dry laugh and spread one hand. "Fine, control room." He led the way through the inner office, past the archive door I had just escaped, and up the short stair to the glassed-in operations room overlooking the pier. Screens flickered green and amber, radios hissed. The smell up there was hot wiring, stale coffee, and sea damp trapped in old carpet. 2 dispatch clerks were at the far end, backs turned, headsets on. That helped me. Witnesses. While Adrian pulled route data onto a monitor and began explaining birth congestion with more detail than I'd ever heard him use on routine paperwork, I kept one hand against my jacket, feeling the edge of the stolen binder against my ribs. When he leaned over the keyboard, Celeste drifted to the window beside me and spoke without moving her mouth much. "If you took something from that archive," she murmured, "put it back before this gets ugly." I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes, and then my phone vibrated with a new message from Beatrice. It was a single photo. The first page of a hospital admission register, with Celeste's false surname, the date, and in the father line, my full name already typed in. I kept my eyes on the birth screen for half a second longer than was natural, just long enough to make it seem as though the message had annoyed me, not gutted me. The photo Beatrice sent was clear. Hospital header, admission line, Celeste under the false surname. And there, in the father field, my own name already typed in before any birth had been publicly acknowledged, before our marriage, before the years of careful grief she had fed me. That meant someone at that clinic knew exactly who I was to the child. This had never been uncertainty. It had been concealment. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket. Adrian was still talking. Numbers, fuel loads, temporary routing congestion. The kind of language men use when they want paper to feel harmless. Celeste stood by the window with one arm folded, watching my reflection in the glass instead of looking at me directly. She had just warned me to put back whatever I took. Now she waited to see whether that warning had landed. I pointed at the monitor. "Why is the Helena Voss listed under a short control birth code tied to a trust review date?" That silenced both of them. Adrian recovered first. "It shouldn't be. Probably a linked admin field." "Probably," I said. "Then print the linked field history." The dispatch clerk at the far end glanced over his shoulder when he heard my tone. Good. Witnesses again. Adrian noticed too. He forced a chuckle, but it came out thin. You really didn't wake up easy this morning. No, I said, and you didn't bring the easy paperwork. Celeste stepped away from the window. Damian, if you're upset about last night, don't use harbor operations to work through it. There it was, the first small attempt to make me emotional and therefore less credible. Not overt, just enough. I turned to her. I'm using harbor operations to understand why my signature keeps turning up in places it doesn't belong. That hit harder than I intended. Adrian's hands stopped on the keyboard. Celeste's face stayed composed, but the color changed very slightly under her skin. I let the silence hold them for a moment, then I shifted course before either could answer. Too soon and they would shut down completely. Print the history, I repeated, quieter now. Adrian did. The printer spat out 3 sheets in jerky bursts. I took them while they were still warm and scanned the timestamps. A series of edits, manual overrides. One username I recognized from the harbor office. One temporary admin credential I did not. And one note at the bottom that made the back of my neck go cold. Cross-reference with family support release Friday, pending guardian confirmation. Guardian confirmation, the same phrase from the trust papers, dressed differently. I folded the printout once and slipped it into the folder. We're done here for the moment, Adrian blinked. You're not signing? Not before legal review. He stared at me as if I had spoken another language. It's a birth proxy, Damian. It's my ship, I said. And attached to it, apparently, are things that are not ships. Celeste moved in before he could answer. Then take it to legal, she said smoothly. You've made your point. Too smooth again. Too fast. She wanted me out of that room before I asked the next question, which meant the next question mattered. I picked up the seal case and the folder and started for the stairs. Halfway to the door, I turned back as if the thought had only just come to me. One more thing, I said. What academy uses the Hawthorne alias in our outreach file? Adrian's face went blank. Celeste's did not. It was tiny, tiny. But she looked at the black binder on the side table before she looked back at me. There it was. I smiled the way a man smiles when he has noticed a misfiled invoice and nothing more. Never mind, I'll find it in the office. I left the control room before they could regroup. Down in the corridor, my hands were shaking so badly I had to stop beside an old lifebuoy rack and breathe through my nose. Through the glass wall of the stairwell, I could see the pier below, the tankers, the crane arms, the men in orange vests moving under the low sky. A whole empire of motion, all of it suddenly resting on lies typed into neat little lines. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was not Beatrice. It was an unknown number, same as before. Only text, no image. If you want the boy alive in your life, come alone tonight. I read the message once, then again, and this time the words did not feel like a threat thrown into the dark. They felt scheduled. If you want the boy alive in your life, come alone tonight. Alive in your life. Whoever sent it knew exactly where to push. They knew I had crossed from business betrayal into something far more dangerous. They knew the child mattered to me already, even before I had seen his face clearly. That meant one of two things. Either Adrian and Celeste were bolder than I thought, or there was a third hand inside this game, one that had been moving pieces while the two of them enjoyed the credit. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked out of the stairwell with a measured pace. Adrian called after me from the control room, asking whether I wanted the printout sent to legal directly. I turned at the doorway and gave him the kind of distracted nod a busy man gives when his head is already on the next problem. Send copies, I said, and don't touch the Helena Voss until I clear it. He spread his hands as if offended by the suggestion. Of course. Celeste said nothing. She only watched me leave. Her stillness was worse than any argument. By the time I reached my car, the harbor wind had sharpened. It came off the water smelling of salt, tar, and iron. Men shouted somewhere near the tanker lane. A crane alarm pulsed in the distance. The world kept working with obscene normality while my life was being disassembled in neat administrative language. I sat behind the wheel and locked the doors before taking the black binder from inside my jacket. I opened it on the passenger seat. Inside were school records. Not full files, but enough. Tuition notices, uniform measurements, behavior assessments, medical visit summaries. Every page carried the same false surname, Julian Hawthorne. But in the inner flap was a thin, transparent sleeve, and inside it lay a photocopy of an intake form so old the corners had gone gray. Across the top, under a later adhesive label, there was a darker original name still faintly visible where the paper had been lifted. Damian Voss. My hands tightened on the edge of the binder. Below that was a note clipped in later. Transfer prepared for Friday evening. Guardian approval in person or by sealed authorization. Vessel training intake to follow under supervision of A. Pike, training vessel. They were not just hiding the boy. They were about to move him into Adrian's physical control, out on water, under company cover, where every objection could be recast as logistics. My stomach turned cold. I called Beatrice from the car. She answered on the first ring. "I found the intake papers," I said. No greeting, no wasted words. "And?" They were changing his name on paper. He's scheduled to be moved Friday evening to a training vessel under Adrian. Her breath caught once. "Then tonight matters." "You knew about tonight?" "No, but I know what men like that do when plans slip. They pull the child tighter." I told her about the message. For the first time since she had stopped me at the stairs, Beatrice did not answer right away. I heard kitchen noise behind her, running water, a cabinet door, the familiar domestic sounds that had become the soundtrack of my education. When she did speak, her voice was even lower. "You cannot go blind." "I may have to." "No," she said. "If they ask you to come alone, it may mean they are counting heads, not eyes. There is a difference." I understood at once. Come alone did not mean no one could know. It meant no visible escort, no guards, no obvious rescue. There were ways around that, if I moved carefully. "I need someone outside harbor management," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Someone who understands fraud before emotion. Someone who can move fast if a child is involved." There was only one name that made sense. Mara Duval, the maritime prosecutor who had quietly gutted a port bribery ring 3 years earlier and never once smiled for the cameras while doing it. Hard, patient, exact. I had funded a legal aid berth through one of our civic grants. I knew her by reputation and one formal dinner handshake. "Can you reach her?" I asked. "No, but there's a card in your study, second drawer, under the insurance files. Your father kept it after that customs hearing." I turned the key in the ignition, mind already racing ahead to roots, timing, cover stories, Friday, the boy, the binder, the hospital record. Then my phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. This time it was a pinned location, and a photo of Julian sitting by a dormitory window, holding the antique music box I had bought for Celeste. I stared at that photo until the rest of the harbor blurred around it. Julian was sitting on a narrow dormitory bed by a window with white painted frames, shoulders slightly turned, both hands around the antique music box I had bought for Celeste less than 24 hours earlier. The lid was open. He was looking down at it, not smiling, not posing, just listening. That detail hit me harder than the rest. Whoever sent the picture had given my gift to the boy, either as bait or as a message, or because in their minds it already belonged to him more than it ever had to my wife. The pinned location beneath the image was St. Bartholomew Coastal Academy. I called Beatrice again before I could think myself into panic. "The picture is from the academy," I said. "And the music box?" she asked at once. "He's holding it." Silence, then a long breath through her nose. "She gave him your gift. Or somebody wanted me to believe she did." "Yes," Beatrice said. "And either way, they are showing you two things. First, they can reach the boy whenever they want. Second, they know exactly which objects carry your heart." That was true. The hospital tag, the bracelet, my mother's ship, the music box. Every proof in this story had arrived wrapped around something intimate, as if facts alone were not enough. They wanted me off balance when the legal blow landed. Emotional men make useful signatures. "I'm going to call Mara Duval," I said. "Do it now. And Damian..." I waited. Do not tell her this like a husband first. Tell her like the head of a shipping line being stripped through forged paper and a concealed dependent. The child matters. But if you open with pain, institutions hear weakness. There are people who save you once in a crisis, and people who keep saving you because they see more clearly than you do. Beatrice was the second kind. Mara answered on the third ring from a private line I found where Beatrice said it would be, tucked beneath old marine insurance files in my study desk. Her voice was crisp, awake, and impatient with nonsense. This is Duval. My name is Damian Voss. I need discretion, and I need it today. A pause, then, you have 90 seconds before I decide whether this belongs to police, fraud, or a bored rich man having a bad morning. So I gave it to her straight. Shell registrations, proxy control, a hidden child tied to my trust, altered birth records, harbor papers, threat messages, a pending Friday structure meant to strip authority from me under a narrative of instability. I left out nothing useful and nothing theatrical. When I finished, she said, "Where are you?" "Still at the harbor." "Leave. Do not confront anyone else today. Bring every physical document you have, including whatever you stole and whatever was sent to you. Meet me in 40 minutes at the old Admiralty Annex on Mercer Lane. Use the side entrance." She hung up before I could answer. I drove there with the binder on the passenger seat and my phone face down, as if it might explode. The annex was a brick building nobody admired anymore, tucked behind newer offices that had forgot it existed. Inside, the hallway smelled of paper, floor wax, and radiator heat. Mara Duval met me in a small records room with no windows, a metal table, and 2 hard chairs. Mid-40s, dark suit, no wasted motion. She did not offer coffee. She offered attention, which was better. I laid everything out. Harbor printouts, the copied trust sheets, the photo from Beatrice, the clinic admission image, the intake page from the binder, the message trail. She studied each item in silence, fingertips barely touching the paper. At last she looked up. "This is organized," she said. "Too organized for an affair that became opportunistic theft. Your wife and that harbor master are players, yes, but somebody taught them structure. Somebody older in paper crime." I thought of the unknown numbers, the courier packet, the speed. You think there's another person? I think there has to be. She tapped the photo of Julian with the music box. And I think this is bait with a timing problem. What does that mean? She turned my phone toward herself, enlarged the pinned image, and pointed to the lower corner of the window behind the boy. Reflected in the glass was not a school crest, not dorm curtains, not even the edge of a chapel yard. It was a loading crane. Mara lifted her eyes to mine. "Mr. Voss," she said quietly, "your son is not at the academy anymore, and whoever sent this wants you to walk into the wrong building tonight." Mara did not waste even a second after saying the boy was not at the academy. She pulled the photo closer, zoomed in again, then took a pen and marked 3 things on a legal pad. The crane arm reflected in the window, the corrugated shadow line behind the bed, the style of the radiator under the sill. "That room is dressed to look domestic," she said, "but the shell is industrial, old dock conversion, not school housing, and that crane isn't from the academy shoreline. It's from cargo side infrastructure, older model, fixed base." I leaned over the table. "Can you place it?" "Not exactly yet, but close enough." She stood, crossed to a metal filing cabinet, and pulled out a harbor redevelopment map from a tube. It snapped open across the table with a dry rustle. Her finger moved over piers, bonded sheds, decommissioned training barracks, and old welfare housing once used for transient crews. Then she stopped at a cluster of buildings near the North Freight Slip. "Here," she said. 3 old service dormitories were converted years ago. 2 were condemned. 1 is still used off books for temporary harbor housing during inspections and labor overflow. Private enough. Close enough to move a child by water fast. My mouth went dry again. "How soon can you get people there?" "I can get eyes there tonight," she said. "A formal entry is harder if whoever sent the message keeps the boy out of direct view and plays this as a private domestic dispute. I need more than suspicion if I'm going to move in a way that holds up tomorrow morning. That was the prosecutor in her. Cold where I was burning. Necessary where I wanted speed. She looked at me hard.
Tell me something true, Mr. Voss. If I advise you not to go, will you listen? I did not answer quickly enough, and that was answer enough. Mara let out one short breath, almost irritated, but not surprised. Fine. Then we do it intelligently. She opened a drawer and took out a tiny black transmitter, no bigger than a matchbox, a skin-colored earpiece, and a slim microphone patch. This goes under your lapel tonight. Another one on Friday if Friday survives tonight. You go in appearing alone. You do not improvise heroics. You do not touch anybody unless a child is in immediate danger. You keep them talking. About what? About the child, about Friday, about why they moved him. Guilty people love explaining their cleverness if they think the listener is trapped. That sounded sickeningly plausible. I called Beatrice from Mara's office while a junior investigator copied the documents I had brought. Beatrice answered in a whisper. She must have been in the house somewhere close to Celeste. She's calm, Beatrice said. Too calm. She changed for lunch, made 2 calls from the blue sitting room, and asked me to plan a private dinner for Friday evening. 4 places. You, her, Adrian, and a legal advisor I haven't seen before. Friday is still on then. Yes, and there is more. A garment bag arrived for her, and another envelope for him. She said tonight everything must stay quiet. Mara heard enough from my side to understand. When I ended the call, she nodded once. Good. They still think the main theater is Friday. That buys us breathing room. By dusk, I was in my own car again, driving toward the North Freight slip with the transmitter under my shirt and Mara's people somewhere behind me in unmarked vehicles I could not identify. The sky had gone the color of bruised steel. Harbor lights blinked on one by one. The road narrowed past stacked containers and dead rail spurs, then curved toward 3 low buildings near the water. One of them had a single lit window on the upper floor. I parked where the pinned location ended and stepped out into air that smelled of kelp, engine oil, and cold iron. No voices, no guards in sight. Just the slap of water below the key and the ticking of my engine as it cooled. Then, from that lit window above me, faint and thin through the glass, I heard the tune from the antique music box. The melody from that little box floated down through the cracked upper pane so thinly it almost felt imagined. I stood in the dark below the building with my hands open at my sides, just as Mara had told me to. No sudden movements, no racing for the stairs like a father in a nightmare. The night smelled of wet timber, rust, and old engine oil. Somewhere out on the black water, a buoy bell gave one lonely knock. Behind me, hidden where I could not see them, Mara's people were in place. That knowledge steadied me a little. Not enough, but some. A voice came from the second-floor landing above. Come in alone, Mr. Voss. Male, older than Adrian. Not a dock worker. Too measured, too pleased with itself. The front door below the lit window opened inward with a tired wooden groan. Yellow light spilled across the threshold and touched the cracked concrete at my feet. I looked once to the dark left where Mara had said there would be a watcher, but I saw nothing. Good. That meant they were where they should be. I went in. The hallway smelled of damp plaster and stale radiator heat. Somebody had tried to make the place seem gentler than it was. A rug in the corridor. A lamp with a soft shade, fresh towels stacked on a chair. But the floor still pitched slightly with the old building's bones, and the window frames still wore harbor grit in the corners. This had never been a real home. It was a room prepared for a story. At the top of the stairs stood a man I had seen only twice in passing over the years, always at legal receptions, always near the edge of maritime money without ever seeming to belong to any single company. Victor Sloan. Thin, silver-haired, narrow mouth, expensive coat. A consultant, officially. A scavenger, I realize now, in practice. One of those people who attach themselves to wealth transfer the way barnacles attach to hulls. He smiled as if we were meeting for drinks. Thank you for being sensible. I climbed until I was level with him.
Where is my son? He tilted his head slightly, appreciating the phrase. Straight to the point. Good. It saves time. The boy. In the next room. Safe, for the moment. For the moment. I heard the music stop. Sloane stepped aside just enough to reveal the room behind him. Julian sat in a wooden chair by the window, still in his school sweater, the antique music box open on a small table beside him. He was older than the baby bracelet, older than the hidden paperwork, older than the years they had stolen from me, and still young enough that his hands looked too thin for the world they had put him inside. He lifted his eyes toward me, and I felt something in my chest tear clean through. He had my father's brow, my mouth, Celeste's eyes perhaps, but quieter. He did not look glad to see me. He looked confused. Julian, I said, and my own voice almost failed me. A woman stood behind him, not Celeste, not Beatrice, not anyone I knew. A house matron type, maybe, or just another paid keeper. She rested one hand on the chair back, protective but not tender. Sloane noticed where my attention went and smiled again. He has been told many stories, he said. You can imagine how difficult it is for a child to sort men into fathers, patrons, donors, and dangers. I kept my eyes on the boy. Julian, are you hurt? He hesitated before answering. No, sir. Sir. Sloane clasped his hands behind his back and strolled to the sideboard like a man hosting a negotiation. You were meant to come into this more gradually. Friday would have been cleaner, a formal dinner, documents, controlled emotion. But Adrian has never had your patience, and Celeste, he gave a little shrug. Celeste is governed by appetite. I turned to him then. You built this. I refined it, he said. Your wife brought grievance. Your harbor master brought access. I brought sequence. There was a faint buzz in my ear. Mara, barely audible. Keep him talking. So I did. You forged my signature at the school. Sloane smiled without shame. We created continuity. Abandoned children are sad. Concealed heirs are useful. A father who knew and neglected, that is legally elegant. My hands curled, then opened again. What do you want tonight? He looked almost amused that I had to ask. Your cooperation, he said, and the seal you did not use this morning. Then another voice came from the doorway behind me, soft and familiar enough to turn my blood to ice. Please don't make this uglier than it has to be, Damian. Celeste had arrived. Celeste stepped into the room as if she were late to a dinner party, not to the wreckage of everything she had built. She had changed again, dark coat, hair pinned back, face composed almost to the point of cruelty. The kind of calm people wear when they believe the ending has already been written in their favor. She closed the door behind her softly and looked first at Sloane, then at Julian, and only then at me. I asked you to let Friday happen cleanly, she said. I could hardly hear her over the sound of my own blood. You lost the right to ask me for anything the moment you put my son in a room like this. Julian looked from one face to another, confused, guarded, trying to understand which adult in front of him was lying least. The woman behind his chair shifted her weight, uneasy now. Even she could feel the room changing. Celeste's eyes flicked to the music box on the table. I gave him that because he liked the tune, she said. You should be pleased about that, if anything. Pleased? I almost laughed. You stole a child, forged my name, drained my company, and you want me to be pleased because you handed him my gift? Sloane moved between us by half a step, not protective of her, protective of the structure. Emotion is understandable, Mr. Voss, but we are still discussing a solvable arrangement. That word again, arrangement. Every sin in a good suit comes wrapped in a word like that. I kept my eyes on Julian. Has she ever told you who I am? The boy said nothing at first. Then, quietly, they said you were dangerous when you got angry. They said you had too much money to care about people. They said I was safer away from you. Every sentence landed like a knell, not because I believed it, because he had. Celeste folded her arms. He was safer away from scandal, away from your name until it became useful. There it was, bare and ugly at last. Useful to whom? I asked. To him, she said, pointing lightly toward Julian. To the line, to the future. You think this company belongs to whoever signs the oldest papers? It belongs to whoever can carry it without softness ruining everything. Sloane gave her a warning glance. She ignored it. You were always too sentimental, Damian. About ships, about family legacy, about loyalty. Adrian understood what had to be done long before you did. He knew blood matters. He knew the line needed a rightful continuation. By ruining me first? Her expression did not change. By removing weakness. In my ear, Mara's voice came low and steady. Keep her talking. We're almost in place. I swallowed once and shifted my weight just enough to face Julian more directly. Listen to me. I did not know about you. Not then. Not until now. That part is true. He looked at the floor, then back at Celeste, as if asking permission with his eyes and hating himself for it. That nearly broke me more than anything else. Sloane stepped back to the sideboard and lifted a slim leather folder. Let us use the time we still have. Friday's dinner can still proceed. The succession packet can still be executed with the proper signatures. In return, the transition of guardianship becomes elegant instead of adversarial. I stared at him. You brought papers here. Of course, he said. I never ask for trust without paper. The woman behind Julian moved her hand from the chair back to her own side. Tiny thing, but it told me she was frightened now. Good, fear loosens people. Then Adrian appeared in the open doorway behind Celeste, breathless from the stairs, harbor coat unbuttoned, anger and worry fighting in his face. He looked at me, then at Sloane, then at the folder in Sloane's hand. And for the first time since this began, Adrian said something that was not controlled at all. You told him too much, he snapped. Sloane turned slowly. No, he said. You moved the boy too soon. Then Julian rose from the chair, still clutching the music box, and asked the one question nobody in that room was ready to answer. If he's my father, he said, looking straight at Celeste, why does my birth paper have his name on it? The room went so quiet after that question that even the harbor seemed to step back from the windows. Julian was still standing with the music box in both hands, looking at Celeste with a calm that did not belong to a child. It belonged to someone who had already learned that adults lie in layers. Celeste opened her mouth, but for once she had no ready-made softness left. Sloane moved first, of course. Men like him always do when truth arrives before paperwork. He is confused, Sloane said. This is exactly why timing matters. In my ear, Mara's voice came sharp and clear. Now! The door behind Celeste opened so fast it struck the wall. Two investigators came in first, then Mara, then Nolan from the pier, all of them moving with the kind of calm that means the chaos has already been measured. The woman behind Julian stumbled back from the chair. Adrian swore and lunged toward the sideboard where the leather folder lay, but Nolan caught his wrist before he made 2 steps. Not a fist fight, not a spectacle, just the clean end of a bad plan. Mara held up her warrant packet and spoke like a blade laid flat on a table. Victor Sloane, Adrian Pike, Celeste Voss. Nobody move any documents. Nobody touch the child. Celeste looked at me then, not at Mara, not at the officers, at me. You brought prosecutors into this? You brought my son into it first. That was the only answer she got. Julian did not cry. He looked at the room, at Adrian pinned in Nolan's grip, at Sloane going gray around the mouth, at Celeste losing control for the first time since I had known her. And then he looked at me again. Really looked. Not at my suit, not at my name, at my face. Is it true? He asked. Yes, I said. That word cost me everything and returned more than I knew how to hold. Mara took the folder from the sideboard. One investigator lifted the school file. Another photographed the room, the papers, the music box, the window, the false domestic staging. Sloane started speaking in legal fragments about misunderstanding, fiduciary complexity, temporary guardianship review. Mara shut him down with one sentence. You forged paternal consent across medical, school, and trust channels while laundering vessel control through a shell registry. Save the performance for recorded interview. Adrian stopped resisting after that. It was almost pathetic, the way fury left him all at once. Celeste did not collapse or scream. She just stood very straight, watching the world refuse to keep obeying her. The strangest moment came next. Julian held out the music box to me. Not dramatically, just a boy offering an object because he no longer knew where it belonged. I took it with both hands. It was supposed to be an anniversary gift, I said quietly. For her? He asked. Yes. He glanced towards Celeste, then away. It doesn't sound like her. No child should have been able to say something that true. Later, after statements, after the room emptied, after the night's machinery had been boxed and labeled and carried away by people with gloves and evidence bags, I sat with Julian in a quiet office at the annex while Mara handled the last calls. The radiator hissed, a vending machine hummed in the hall. He sat in a chair too large for him, sleeves pushed to his forearms, still studying me as if fatherhood might be a language he had heard of but never spoken. I don't know what I'm supposed to call you, he said. You don't have to call me anything tonight. He nodded once. After a minute, he asked, Did you really not know? No, I said, but I came the moment I did. That mattered to him. I saw it matter. The investigations that followed were long, ugly, and exact. Blackwake folded under document seizure. The vessel registrations were restored before Friday could become a ceremony of theft. The trust releases were frozen. The clinic records, the school intake layers, the forged signatures, the private transfer language, all of it came apart under light. Sloane proved to be the spine behind the fraud. Adrian became a cooperating witness when the architecture of the scheme stopped flattering him and started threatening prison. Celeste faced what she had made, which is all I will say about that. Julian came home slowly. Not to a mansion first, to truth first, then to me. And Beatriz never returned to the side corridors of my life. I asked her formally and in front of Julian to sit at my table as family. And when she did, she placed her napkin on her lap with the same quiet care she once used for kitchen cloths, except now nobody looked through her. We all looked toward her. Some people inherit names, some inherit damage, and once in a rare while, if Grace is stubborn enough, someone walks into the break and starts handing back what was hidden piece by piece until the house sounds different when evening comes. A few weeks later, Julian wound the music box himself at supper. The tune drifted across the dining room, and this time nobody used it as bait. Outside, down at the water, the harbor lamps came on one by one, steady in the dark, each one holding its small circle against the tide.